Hi there, this is Max from Iridescent Color, and in today's video I would like to demonstrate all the functions and features of the new Iris Hue Pro version 2 update. So let's dive straight into it and start with the standard version of the DCTL. So one thing that makes this DCTL special compared to other options we have in terms of adjusting hue is, for example, if you use the green vector here in Color Slice and want to adjust the foliage here in the image, you can see that we're really not adjusting the foliage that much at all. And that is because most of this foliage, as you can see here, doesn't actually land in the green vector, but in the yellow vector. And Iris Hue Pro version 2 has more perceptually aligned vectors. So if we're touching the green slider here, you can see we're really getting hold of the foliage and we're able to adjust where the foliage lands, and in this case get a lot more color separation by moving the green foliage more towards a bluish hue. Now, another thing to note, that Iris Hue Pro is built to be extremely clean, and there are a lot of guardrails built in to make sure that you cannot create hue folds and other problems that might break your image when you're using this tool as a look development tool to create your own show LUTs. So I can demonstrate this to you by showing you the curve, and one thing you can see right away is that the adjustments that we can make are really subtle and really gentle, and we can't really push a hue further than its neighboring hue. So you will never be able to push green towards an actual blue. It will always only be a slightly cyanish green, because you're really supposed to shape your palette when creating a look and not creating any kind of crazy hue rotations most of the time. Another thing to note is that these guardrails take into account that some of these adjustments might overlap. So for example, if you've already maxed out on your green hue adjustment here, and then you push the global hue, as you can see, the green doesn't get shifted even more, but it's all the other colors that are now catching up with that already maxed out adjustment here. And again, this is just to make sure that your rotations remain subtle and gentle. And another thing to notice, we've got this custom slider here, which means this is by default is set to a hue that is aligned with roughly with skin tones. And theoretically, we might align that with a greenish vector and then double up that adjustment, right? But as you can see, we can't actually do that because, again, this tool under the hood is making sure that you're not creating folds and that you're not overdoing any adjustment. And so it will make these intelligent decisions to steer you away from breaking your image no matter what you do in this tool. So let's stay with this custom slider for a second and have a look at the matte selector here. If we turn on highlight mode, you can see we get this overlay. And then if we set this to, we can set this to any vector we want, but if we set it to custom, you can see that if we move around the custom center here, we get a very good visualization of which hues we're actually adjusting here with our adjustment. So I'm going to set this to something that's very close to a skin tone vector. And then we can basically use this slider, if I turn off highlight mode, to really fine tune where the hue, where the skin tones land, if they land a little bit further towards like a yellowish hue or more towards a reddish hue. Now, this is all fair and well, but sometimes you're not doing look development, but you're working on a specific shot, or you're working on something, on a sub-look, on a very small selection of shots, and you feel like you can push things a little bit further and be a little bit more surgical without breaking anything. And for example, in an image like this, you might feel like you really want to push all of these reds a little bit further towards magenta, but you don't actually want to touch the skin tones. And that's pretty hard to do in the standard version of this tool. But the surgical version of the tool here, as you can see, if we turn on highlight mode and go to red, allows us to focus in that adjustment. And we can get a very clean matte here of just the reds. And we're really masking out all of the skin tones here for the most part anyway. And so now if we shift this hue further towards magenta, you can see we're changing the red in a very clean way for the most part, but we're not affecting skin tones that much. But again, if you make extreme adjustments like this and they're this surgical, it is totally possible to run into issues, and you can see this here, which is why I wouldn't recommend this on a look basis, but just on a shot-by-shot basis, because this is just a very narrow adjustment, and the more narrow your adjustment becomes, the easier it is to get into trouble. But there's another option that we have here, and that is Iris Hue Pro Dynamic, and this one works a little bit differently again. And with this one, you can get the most nuanced adjustments, but this one also really requires you to check what you're doing with the curve overlay. And I'm going to show you what I mean in a second. So what I can do with this one is I can, for example, say I want to adjust the reds in this image again, and maybe push them towards yellow. But now you can see we're also affecting those magenta kind of colors here. And if I turn on highlight mode and I go to red, we can see this very clearly. We get a lot of the yellow and the magenta spilling into this matte. So what we can do here is, for one, we can adjust the red center to make sure that we're really centering in on that adjustment. And now we can basically use these center sliders here to refine our selection. So if I show you what I can do here with the red, I can push this up. And now if I move the magenta center closer to the red vector, you can see that that narrows the red selection just on the magenta side, so that we get a narrower selection just on the magenta side and mask off some of that magenta. And then if we want to, we can do the same thing with the yellow center here. And that way we can still narrow our adjustment, but we can be a little bit more precise with it and really fine tune where we land. And that way now, if I turn this off, we're really focusing our adjustment on this red stripe here, and you can see that the magenta stripe right next to it isn't affected at all. One thing to note, however, with this one as well, is if we do something like an adjacent red and yellow adjustment like this, now you can see we're creating a hue fold, which is, as I've explained in the last video, is when we get a curve that isn't monotone. That means we see a dip where it goes down before it goes back up, and this might be fine on a shot-by-shot basis, but it's most definitely a problem when you're creating a look and a show LUT. So when you're using this dynamic version and you need that level of control and you need that the level of nuance, you really need to use this overlay to make sure that you're not creating folds like this. Okay, let's have a look at the other features that we have here. One feature that we have is a hue tilt feature, and this can just really help you if you're crafting a look to introduce just a tiny little bit of it's almost like a split tone effect, but rather than moving all shadows towards a specific hue and all highlights towards another hue, you're really just rotating the hues based on luminance, so that if I turn this up, you can see now the skin tones and the highlights move a little bit towards green and to the shadows a little bit more towards magenta. Or we can do the opposite and get more of a magenta in the highlights and a little bit more of a green in the shadows. And that is specifically with regards to the skin tones here, but it really is just an entire hue rotation based on luminance centered around middle gray. And the last two sliders are with regards to the luminance mask. So you can, if we turn on the matte selector to global and highlight mode, you can see if I turn on the luminance mask here, we can either mask off the highlights here and then use the weight to either really narrow down on just the highlights of the image or make it very broad, or we can do the opposite and mask off the shadows from this adjustment. And these are really soft, very gentle masks, so you can't get super precise and surgical with them, because that's not what they're built to do. They're really just supposed to help you fine-tune where in the luminance range you want your adjustments to happen. So for example, maybe I want red rotation towards yellow, but I don't want that throughout the entire image. I just want that towards the highlights. So I can use the luminance mask and push it all the way to the left, and then use the weight slider to fine tune that adjustment. so that now we're getting a hue rotation towards yellow in the reds, but only as we climb up the tone scale. And that is a really nice way to craft even more nuanced looks and craft even more nuanced hue rotations for your looks. So that was just a quick overview over all the features and functions in the new Iris Hue Pro version 2. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions or recommendations, please feel free to put them in the comments or to email me at info@iridescentcolor.com. And I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very, very soon.